What's going on, everybody? Welcome back to the Buys, Sells episode of the Upper Hand Fantasy Podcast. This is Faraz Siddiqui. I'm here with Zach Rizzuto. We're here to help you identify some values to trade for, maybe some, unsustainable production to trade away, some guys, in between who you might want to buy and sell going into week 4. But we're here to help with all that. Let's identify some trade values. I do want to get into some news real quick before we get into that, Zach. David Montgomery is trending in the right direction to play on Thursday night. So after he said he might miss a few weeks, it looks like there's a chance he plays this week. This is a good matchup against the Packers. So Montgomery would be like a low-end RB2. I would say Gibbs would be a solid RB2 play. The hope is that Gibbs starts being used in the receiving game consistently. I feel like it's coming for Gibbs. I know people are getting impatient with him, but the usage increased a ton from week 1 to week 2. Montgomery got hurt, and then Gibbs kind of had to replace that Monty role in week 3. So be patient with Gibbs. Keep starting him as an RB2. Don't have the RB1 expectations just yet. Those days are coming. The Packers have allowed the 4th most receptions to running backs over the first 3 games, so that is the hope that he gets used that way.
Right.
Christian Watson is planning on playing on Thursday. That's a great sign for Jordan Love and this entire offense. I'd start Watson as a high-end wide receiver 3 this week. See where it goes from there. There's a lot of upside here. I'm trying to trade for Watson before the game on Thursday if possible. If he doesn't do much or is limited, I'll be sending more trade offers prior to week 5. He was on our buy show last week, so I don't want to talk about him too much this week in terms of why we're buying him. But, we did talk about him last week as a buy. We'll spare you that this week. If he does play, I think I'd downgrade guys like Doubs and Reed, but they're going to have their games as well, moving forward, even with Watson in the lineup. It's hard to say right now where the targets are going to go. I think my preferred wide receiver right now between Doubs and Reed would probably be Doubs.
Yeah.
Zach, what's up, buddy?
Yeah, it has to be. And with Doubs, we've seen Jaden Reed. He's had some target shares, but what's really making me excited about Christian Watson coming back is the fact that Jordan Love has looked good, and he hasn't dialed in on any receiver yet so far. Last week, Romeo Doubs was a guy, he had a 26% target share, and then the week before that, Jaden Reed had a 26% target share. So it's been all over the place. There hasn't been that stabilizing factor. Jordan Love, he's thrown a lot of touchdowns, but the crosshairs, they've been all over the place. So if Christian Watson can come back, he can be that stabilizing force and also the home run hitter for Green Bay. I'm excited about it. There was optimism coming into the season, about the intrigue of Jordan Love at quarterback, but that seems to be out the window. It looks like Jordan Love, he's a good quarterback. So he's in good hands, Christian Watson. And moving forward, I think he's going to have a high enough target share and he's going to look good enough that he's going to be the clear wide receiver 1. And I think there is room too, like you mentioned, that Romeo Doubs, he could still be a big part of this offense. Him and Jaden Reed could mix in terms of the target share that they get. But I'm the biggest fan of Christian Watson. I've been waiting for this. And if you have Christian Watson like I do, you're definitely been looking forward to this. I think good things are really coming.
Brian Dable, he's calling Saquon Barkley day-to-day. This is a high ankle sprain, okay? So I personally doubt that he plays. The fact that he plays on Monday night can complicate things a little bit for you in case they don't, rule him out on Sunday or over the weekend. If I had Saquon, I'd want him to sit so that he doesn't re-aggravate that high ankle sprain. If I know he's playing over the weekend, I'm playing him, but we'll see what the practice reports say this week. Matt Breida still worth a hold. If he's available on waivers, he's still worth a pickup. This is a much, much better matchup against the Seahawks than he had last week against the 49ers. He did play about 80% of snaps against the 49ers, so he is a flex play against the Seahawks this week. Right. Now, before we get into the buys and sell, guys, I have one ask, and that's to hit the subscribe button or hit the follow button on your podcast app. It would mean the world to us. If you're watching on YouTube, if you can hit the subscribe button, that would be amazing. Just take a second to do that now if you can, and especially if you're not driving at the moment while you're listening to the podcast, okay?
Right.
Zach, let's get into our buys and sells. I want to start with one of my favorite buys this week, and that's Jonathan Taylor. I'm not sure that the concern that JT does not want to be a Colt anymore is there at the moment. I can't believe I'm putting this much stock into an Instagram story, okay? But the fact that he posted himself working out in the Colts facility with the Colts logo clearly displayed up on the wall there, and him captioning it with loading kind of tells me that he just wants to play. And it seems like he's going to play out this season as a Colt. But he should be back in week 5. He'll take this backfield over. Zach Moss, a running back who has never been fantasy relevant for his 3-year career, prior to the season. He's been awesome for fantasy. He's been averaging the 5th most expected fantasy points per game based on his opportunity. Deion Jackson ranked 6th, okay, in week 1 in expected points per game based on his week 1 opportunity with Anthony Richardson. And now JT is only going to take things to another level when he's back. And you know, when you consider that Moss has the 8th most yards before contact per attempt among the 37 running backs who had at least 25 carries so far this year, that tells you that JT is going to be able to take advantage of some space that the offensive line is apparently creating here. So in week 1 with Anthony Richardson, the Colts played at the 3rd fastest pace in the NFL. Okay, that's what you want. This is an underrated aspect for fantasy. Like, more plays mean more fantasy points. Deion Jackson in week 1, he had a 17% target share according to Fantasy Life utilization from Anthony Richardson. So fast-paced offense, number 1. Anthony Richardson looking better than I thought he would early. Him willing to check it down if he has to. All reasons why I'm back in. Okay, so if you're in need of a high-end running back, I'm doing what I can to get JT. Okay, am I willing to trade like a Puka Nacua for JT? If I really need a running back, I'll do it. Okay, maybe a Tank Dell and Alexander Madison combo for JT. Tutu Atwell, you know, they have Cooper Kupp coming back soon. Him and DeAndre Swift for JT. A James Conner and Nico Collins combination for JT. Just try it. I don't know if it's going to work. You can try it. Amari Cooper had a big week this week. You know, maybe him for JT straight up. See if you can get away with that. Maybe sprinkle a little Isaiah Pacheco, you know, if you have Amari Cooper and you're trying to get JT. You know, just remember, you're trying to satisfy a 0-3 JT manager or maybe a 1-2 JT manager with guys that they can plug into their lineup this week. Okay, so you want to analyze their lineup. You want to set their lineup in your head with the guys that you would send them for JT. So improve their week 4 chances of winning for real, and you might be able to get a deal done.
Yeah, I think this is like an obvious call, and it's really easy, you know, to say a guy's coming off IR, which is where he's been these past few weeks, and say, yeah, you can buy him now because he hasn't done a whole lot of production. But this situation is just, you know, locked in at this point. If Zach Moss is dominating this backfield, that means there's nobody else that you have to worry about really taking snaps from Jonathan Taylor once he comes back. And like you mentioned, Anthony Richardson, he's looked good. The offense is moving. You know, they're not running things slow, so that's only going to help Jonathan Taylor. I thought this would be a tough situation where the Colts suddenly aren't scoring a lot of touchdowns and the offense is struggling to get its feet underneath it, but they've already had 2 quarterbacks under center. In both games, they've looked pretty good on offense, at least good enough to get it done from a fantasy perspective. Zach Moss was getting targets in this backfield, which is hilarious because he hasn't been a pass-catching running back in his career. He has at least 3 targets in each game, and that's not a whole lot, but when you're also getting 18, 30 in the past 2 weeks rushing attempts, you know, that's going to be plenty to get it done. And Jonathan Taylor is going to step right into that role. So obviously the ceiling is very high. We're looking at hopefully Jonathan Taylor from 2021, not what we saw last year in 2022, but there's a lot more contributing to that than there was in 2021. I like Jonathan Taylor moving forward. And there is still that chance, you know, he could be traded. But like you mentioned, that IG story, it is interesting that it looks like he's going to be staying with the Colts. Even if he would get traded, I don't think there's a situation where he would go somewhere and suddenly not get enough work unless he was traded to like the 49ers, which isn't going to happen. So even if he doesn't play the rest of the season with the Colts, as long as he's healthy, I'm not worried about him. He even has a chance to appreciate, depending on how things shake out, if there would be a trade. But the situation that he's stepping into right now in Indianapolis is very good because not only they're not just relying on the run game to get things done, they're also moving the ball in the air. Michael Pittman too, you know, he looks like he's going to be a solid fantasy receiver. Just overall, this Colts offense has been a surprise and a pleasant one at that. And Jonathan Taylor coming back is only going to make it that much better. So I think he is going to help the Colts offense just as much as the rest of the Colts offense being good is going to help Jonathan Taylor. I think this is a really good call here.
I love it, man. All right, so who's your buy that you want to talk about first?
Yeah, I got another running back here. And you will probably agree with this because you're a Jets fan, but I'm going to go with Breece Hall. Now, he's slowly watching his workload get increased, but nobody's noticing that because they can't take their eyes off the Zach Wilson tailspin going on right now. And I say tailspin because Jets, planes, you know, good analogy right there. But what's it going to do when the quarterback situation is a mess on any team, not just the Jets? We know it's a mess and it's helping everybody else, all of their values to go down. What's it going to do? It's going to drive the price way down on every other asset in the offense, and that's what's happening in New York. Not only Garrett Wilson, but also Breece Hall. The great thing about Breece Hall is he's still not producing at a startable level, but I bet he will. So you can take advantage of that right now. If he's not producing at a startable level, chances are his fantasy manager is very, very frustrated, and he's ready to move him. I don't know how much longer the Zach Wilson project is going to continue, and I don't know. I don't think you really know that either. But it looks like he's getting one more shot under center, even with Trevor Siemian signing with the team yesterday. The buy window is so wide open with Breece Hall as long as Wilson's a starter, and that might not be much longer. So you might want to get on this trade as soon as you can. He saw his snaps jump from 32% and 33% in weeks 1 and 2 to 48% in week 3, and his route participation is up from 19% to 28% in that same time span. He's only going to get healthier. He's got 2 back-to-back week losing performances, like I mentioned before. Who's going to want to hold on to that, especially with the way the Jets offense is looking right now? I think eventually we're going to see a quarterback change. That's going to be good news for everybody involved in New York. Swoop in and rescue him like a prisoner of war, Breece Hall, and just wait for that changing of the mantle at quarterback. Hull's stock is going to explode, especially as he gets healthier. He's played back-to-back games against 2 tough run defenses, and that trend's going to continue this week with the Chiefs on tap. They've been kind of sneaky in terms of a low points allowed, but the schedule gets better down the stretch. I'm willing to bet that the Jets look much more competitive than they do right now in a couple weeks, assuming the quarterback change happens. I'm willing to buy into that, especially at a super low price, which you can get Hall at right now because he's been terrible so far. But the usage is moving in a direction that we were hoping to see, and that's going to help ease any worry you have about him, especially at a low price if you go get him.
Yeah, the big thing for me is the fact that, Dalvin Cook had almost 50% of the rushing attempts in week 1. They had the same amount of rushing attempts in week 2. And then in week 3, Breece Hall had 57% of the rushing attempts, with Michael Carter, who did have some rushing attempts in week 2. There was a little bit of a share there, like a timeshare between 3 guys. He had no attempts in week 3. Okay, so Breece Hall's taken over this backfield. And Zach mentioned all of it, but the rushing attempts is really something I'm looking at. I'm like saying, okay, well, he is the guy. He is the 1A in this backfield, with Michael Carter getting kind of delegated, or I guess is that the word? I don't even know if that's the word. But he's moving out of this timeshare at this point. He's running some routes, and that's fine. But Breece Hall is going to be that guy. There is no way that Breece Hall is only going to be running 28% route participation at this point. Like, it's going to go up to like 60%, 65% at some point, because he is that dude in the receiving game. He was like the most efficient receiving back last season before he got hurt. Okay, so right. I'm definitely on board with this one, man. Now, I have a wide receiver that I want to buy here, and I'm kind of buying high on him, and that's Jakobi Meyers. Jimmy G is in the concussion protocol, so maybe we wait a week, but he should be on your radar. He's wide receiver 5 in fantasy points per game right now, but he's also wide receiver 6 in expected fantasy points per game. So he's not necessarily overproducing on the opportunity, right? He's doing what good players do with the opportunity that they're given. The target distribution in 2 games with both Devontae Adams and Jakobi Meyers has been extremely tight. It's so tight. So tight. Okay? So if I'm looking at Fantasy Life utilization report in weeks 1 and 2 when these guys played together, they had a combined, not week 1 and 2, week 1 and 3, right? Jakobi Meyers missed week 2. They had a combined 73% target share in each of those weeks. Okay, that's absolutely insane. And that's exactly what you want to see, right? We don't want those targets to be widely distributed. Okay, 38% target share for Jakobi in week 1, 27% in week 2. This is not new for Meyers, right? He's always been somebody, we talked about this before, that he's always demanded a high target share. 22% last year in a dysfunctional offense, 24% target share in 2021, 23% in 2020. Okay, the track record is there. And it looks like he can take a big step forward this year potentially. Not something that I saw coming, but we know that he's a good player. He's been heavily prioritized by this Raiders offense. And even if the offense stinks, this type of tight target distribution, it just blossoms fantasy points.
Yes, we love tight fantasy target shares. That's exactly what we love to see. But yeah, with Jakobi Meyers, we talked about this. I think we talked about this last season. Obviously, no one was really in on Jakobi Meyers last season because he was on the Patriots offense. It wasn't looking like it was going to be very good, but he's always had that target share throughout his career. And what we're seeing this year, and going back to your point about not seeing this coming, this chance to take a big step forward, is a fantasy relevant wide receiver that's, top 20 looking right now, working alongside of Devontae Adams, who's usually the guy that's, hogging all the targets. So definitely Jakobi Meyers is a good call on a buy here. He's produced very well. The targets have been there. Jimmy G is going, there's a chance he's out this week. So I just pay attention to that. If he's out, it'll probably be either Brian Hoyer or Aiden O'Connell. If there's a quiet game in there, there's a chance that his value could go down a little bit and make him an even better buy after this week. But there's nothing wrong with buying right now. Like you mentioned, you don't have to buy everybody low. At this point, as long as Jimmy G is at quarterback, and I'm expecting him to be back, soon, it's just a concussion. Like, this is going to be a fantasy relevant wide receiver room. Both of these guys can get it done, Devontae Adams and Jakobi Meyers. And it's a really good, pleasant surprise that you had if you drafted Jakobi Meyers late. He wasn't going very high at all in drafts. So right now, I think that moving forward, we're looking at a solid fantasy floor each week. Now, obviously, Devontae Adams is the ceiling play here, going into week 4 and beyond. But Jakobi Meyers, he's going to be relevant. They're not just going to phase him out of the offense. It looks like Hunter Renfrow, not even an option here. They haven't been targeting tight ends at all in Las Vegas. Like you mentioned, that tight target distribution, that's exactly what you want to see. And that's kind of reminds me.
It's been 3 guys. It's actually been just 3 guys who's getting like 95% of the targets, which is insane, right?
Yeah.
It's Devontae Adams, Jakobi Meyers, and Josh Jacobs, who's still a buy, by the way. Okay, we talked about him last week, though. But yeah, like it's those 3 guys.
Yeah,
that's it.
The
That's
usage
exactly
is
what you want to see.
Yeah, the usage is still there 100% for all these guys. And like you mentioned with Josh Jacobs, definitely a buy too. But Jakobi Meyers, I love it. This is exactly what I wanted to see. I think he's going to have a solid enough workload moving forward for him to be in lineups, not only just like on teams, but in lineups, going forward. And I have another buy. Now, my guy, it's another New York team. He's a tight end. It's Darren Waller. Rule number 1 of the Giants offense, there's no such thing as a fantasy relevant wide receiver. And this is held true through the first 3 weeks of the season. Isaiah Hodgins has the highest weekly fantasy finish of any Giants wide receiver as a wide receiver 32 in week 2. And that's where Darren Waller comes in. I've been seeing a lot of people panicking on Waller. They're like, I'm asking the hard question right now about whether it was worth it to take Darren Waller as high as I did, in drafts. Like, that's what people are saying. I've seen a couple people on Twitter saying that. Like, it's week 3, guys. Like, let's cool it a little bit. 2 of his matchups were against the 49ers and the Cowboys. One of them was in the pouring rain. In the one fair weather game he played this year against the Cardinals, granted, he finished as a tight end 4 on the week. He's also got a hold of a 20% target share, 28% air yard share. Both of those are going to get it done at tight end in today's fantasy football landscape. I mean, he's second in the NFL among tight ends in total air yards and a share, which is higher than Hockenson and Kittle. And his production hasn't come close to matching that utilization. So it's going to start trending towards the mean. When the utilization is there, the production will follow over time. The schedule from here for the Giants is a lot better. They have Seattle and Miami on tap in the next 2 weeks. That's a far cry from what they've seen these first 3 weeks. If you're sitting with anyone besides Kelsey, Andrews, Hockenson, Kittle, I'd say even Laporta right now, he's in that upper echelon because he's getting those targets regardless. I'm looking to upgrade at tight end for cheap, and you can do that with Waller. I mean, the stigma around the Giants offense is heavy, and you can take advantage of it. It looks like Waller's having a horrific season. People are obviously panicking on Darren Waller. Like I mentioned, I've had a bunch of people throwing offers around. I've gotten questions asking if they should move Waller. If you're looking for a tight end with a chance to blow up, I would go with Darren Waller because the Giants offense is going to look better moving forward when they have better matchups, and they have that coming. So Darren Waller is a guy that I'm looking to buy, especially if I'm sitting there with a tight end that isn't really doing a whole lot. Chances are you had some upside guy. If I have like an Evan Ingram, I would consider moving for Darren Waller because I think Darren Waller still has that top 5 upside. He just hasn't showed it yet these first 3 weeks.
That makes me feel a lot better, Zach, because I have Darren Waller in a lot of places. He hasn't come through for me.
I do too.
But I'm hoping that moving forward he does. But thanks for making me feel better, though. I appreciate that. All right. I have a sell for you guys, and this might surprise some people. Kenneth Walker is someone I'm fielding offers for right now. And I want to see what's out there. Okay, he just had a 30-point game. He had 59 yards receiving. That's not something that's usually in his repertoire. We usually are not going to see that type of receiving game from Kenneth Walker. It wasn't like it was on a bunch of targets or anything like that. That's not going to happen often. But he had 4 touchdowns in the last 2 games. There were a lot of running back carries available for the Seahawks this past week. But his snap share is going down. And Zach Charbonnet's snap share and opportunity is going up. Okay, and this was not like a closeout situation where Charbonnet came in to close out a game. This was the plan coming into the game because Charbonnet was doing this from the get. Okay, can Kenneth Walker be an RB2 rest of season? For sure, definitely. This is a good offense. He's a very good player, and he could come through for you most more weeks than not, right? But can you get more value back than what he might end up turning into? I think so. And this isn't about Charbonnet now becoming fantasy relevant. It's more about Charbonnet taking enough away from Walker's workload. You know, he had 2 carries inside the 5 yard line so far this year, okay? And that's without him having as big of a role as he did in this past game, okay? He almost had a touchdown in this game as well. Like, I don't know if you saw this. Like, he truck sticked that dude at the 1 yard line. Ooh, and it looked easy for him too, dude. But he also has taken over the passing down duties, including the 2-minute snaps in this game. So he does get an upgrade. Okay, so he is a better stash at the end of your bench. But back to Walker. Yeah, he had 18 carries in this game. But according to Fantasy Life data, his overall rushing share dropped from getting more than 70% of the rushing attempts each of the first 2 weeks to 55% of the rushing attempts in week 3. Okay, this is a 1-game sample, right? But Charbonnet can get worked in even more, right? This is a rookie that they just drafted, a rookie that they're still working in, right? So, you know, he looked good in this game also. Like, Charbonnet was looking good. So, like, there is a chance that he does end up taking a little bit more work. Even if this is kind of the limit of where he kind of hovers in terms of work taken away from Walker, I think it's still relatively significant, I would say. So this is not like a fire sale by any means. Get good value back. Like, get a high-end wide receiver too. Like, get an Olave or a Devontae Smith. I think those might be better assets, I would say, than Kenneth Walker moving forward in a vacuum, right? And we talked about this potentially happening before the season in this backfield. That this was kind of my concern. I did not have that concern the first 2 weeks of the season with Walker getting the lion's share of the work. 70% of the rushing share is amazing. But we're not seeing that right now. We could start seeing that trend in the other direction moving forward. And by the way, his fantasy playoff stretch is brutal. And the weeks leading up to the fantasy playoffs is brutal too. If you start in week 12, you have the 49ers, the Cowboys, the 49ers, the Eagles, and the Titans. Okay, so that's not really a good schedule for running backs.
Yeah, not ideal at all. I mean, could we see that change from now till then? Yeah, definitely. But the way it looks right now, you can definitely use that as a reason to move off Kenneth Walker, especially if you're getting good return on what's called value for him. But it's also intriguing. You talk about the rushing share going down. His route participation has gone down, and his target share has gone down. He had 5 targets in week 1, and he had 3 yards to show for it. This week he gets 3 targets, and he puts up 59 yards. You mentioned that 59 yards being an outlier. That's not going to be there every week, especially if Zach Charbonnet is going to start moving into that. Charbonnet moved from 23% the first 2 weeks to 42% route participation. Obviously, the target share hasn't showed up just yet for him, but he's running more routes, and that's going to cut into Kenneth Walker's upside, like you mentioned. So we were worried about Kenneth Walker coming into the season, and he's looked good so far. But Zach Charbonnet isn't just going to stay away. They drafted him, I think it was the 2nd round, right? They drafted him in the 2nd round. They're not just going to keep him off the field. They drafted him for a reason, and it looks like it's a 2-man backfield right now, even though Kenneth Walker's putting up these big games. So I think that's a good call, 100%, on Kenneth Walker as a sell. I'm going to shift gears. You can sell running backs right now. I think there are a lot of wide receivers that you can sell too. I have 2 wide receiver sells. I'm going to get in my first one right here, and his name is George Pickens. Now, before you come at me, has George Pickens looked good enough to get the job done in 2 games without Diontae Johnson in the lineup? Sure, you could say that. You can't hold 29% target share and 43% air yard share against him in these past 2 games without Johnson in the lineup. But the problem with Pickens is that utilization is not coming as a product of necessity. It's not coming as a product of him earning those targets. It's coming as a product of necessity, not necessarily because he's this guy that they have to get the ball to. When Diontae Johnson and Pickens were both active last season, Diontae Johnson saw a 24% target share to Pickens 14%. Now, could that get a little closer? Maybe this season, but it doesn't matter because Diontae Johnson is that guy when it comes to earning targets. And we had this discussion tons of times over the offseason and last season when we were on the podcast. Calvin Austin, he's also come in and he's looked fantasy relevant. He put up a 19% target share of his own these past 2 weeks, and Pickens has produced at a very unsustainable level. I mean, you want to talk about inflated production right now based on what he's getting? He put up a shaky 50% catch rate. He's catching half of the passes thrown his way these past 2 weeks. And he's relying on one play, which was a 71-yard catch and run, Garrett Wilson style. That accounts for 38% of his fantasy points over the past 2 weeks. That was a 71-yard touchdown. So just under half of his fantasy points have come from one play, which is just a lightning strike. You're not going to be able to have that every single week. I know we love the highlight reel catches that Pickens can make. We know he's a good talent. But the Steelers offense, they've also looked pretty rough so far, and they're in the bottom third of scoring offenses right now. I'm moving Pickens while I have a game log that looks good enough to make him valuable, and while Deontay Johnson's return is still far enough out in the distance that people aren't going to look and be like, well, his value is going to fall. We still have at least 2 games with Deontay Johnson out. I think you need to take advantage of Pickens putting up good enough performances this week on unsustainable production that you'll be able to get value out of him before it kind of falls off the cliff and Deontay Johnson comes back and claims his place as the top receiver in Pittsburgh.
I am glad that Pickens is getting some sort of high target share though. Like that is like somewhat encouraging because like I was worried that he wasn't going to get it at all. But 33% target share in week 2, very, very solid. Week 3, 24%. But then you look at what Calvin Austin did. He also put up 24% target share as well in week 3. Okay, so you got to separate yourself from Calvin Austin. Okay, and that's kind of where we're getting at. Also, like Kenny Pickett, like he's not like look at these catchable target rates, man. 44% in week 2, 67% in week 3. Calvin Austin, same thing, 33% in week 3. Not great. So this is a situation where we also have to realize that this offense isn't good right now, right? And if you want to target guys on good offenses, George is a way to get like one strategy is to get out from bad offenses when you have those players, and I think that's another reason why we should be doing that. I think that with Deontay Johnson, I don't have as much of a concern because he's going to come through for you most weeks, regardless. Okay.
Right.
But yeah, no, I do like it. I think I would love to see him get more work. I would love to see him blossom into a good receiver because when he does get opportunity, man, like some of the catches and highlight plays that he makes is really, really, really fun to watch. And I like him as a player. I'm just hoping that he can kind of, become a little bit more of a target earner, which would be nice, and kind of separate himself from the pack, right? That's kind of something that we haven't seen just yet.
Right. Catch that lightning in a bottle. Because right now it's just been lightning all over the place, but it hasn't been, boiled down to its essence where it's like consistent production.
Right.
And I think that can happen. But Deontay Johnson comes back, it's going to make it difficult.
I agree. By the way, guys, you can check out the website for our trade charts and trade articles as well. All that is completely free at upperhandfantasy.com. I think that's going to do it for James Conner, guys. Okay? Arizona is kind of the Cinderella story type of thing right now. Beating Dallas at home last week, right? Having a great first half against the Giants, almost beating the Commanders in week 1. I think overall, like, this isn't a good team. I'm not sure how sustainable this is. Their offensive production has been pretty good, like middle of the pack this season, but also 13th most points per game so far through 3 games in the NFL. And I think that can come to a hard stop pretty quickly, right? They had a good start here. Is that sustainable for the rest of the year? I really don't think so. And Conner has been kind of that engine, right? That kind of has been keeping this thing alive. The thing is that he had 5 targets in week 1, but he's had 3 targets total over the last 2 weeks. Right? And that's what's going to keep him alive when he's not scoring touchdowns. He scored 2 touchdowns the last 2 weeks. Do you expect Conner to be keeping you alive with touchdowns moving forward? Like on this offense? Like, I don't think so. Arizona's going to San Francisco this week. They have Cincy the following week. So if I can sell Conner as a solid RB2 and get a real solid RB2 back, I'd love that. Like I talked about selling Walker, but at least he's on a good offense, right? At least he's a better player too. Like I'd rather sell Conner plus a little bit to get Walker. Like, I'd sell Conner right now to go get Jacoby Myers. Like, go make that deal, if that manager needs a running back. A lot of managers do need running backs. And Jacoby Myers, when they drafted Jacoby Myers, they weren't necessarily banking on him starting for him. Maybe their wide receivers are solid, right? But they need that running back because they lost, I don't know, they lost J.K. Dobbins or, they don't have Saquon Barkley this week or whatever the case may be. I think that's the move I'm trying to make.
Yeah, I completely agree with this one. I mean, I think keeping James Conner right now is like parking your vehicle on a steep incline and not putting the emergency brake on, because like there's a chance it could just go and your car or James Conner's value is just going to crash at some point. You're just putting a lot of faith in it when there really shouldn't be. You talk about the offense; they have looked better than we all thought they would be, but you still look up and down the roster, and this isn't a roster that has a bunch of talent at all. It's probably going to bottom out at some point. It's too bad that they got that win against the Cowboys because, of course, that makes Dallas look bad. But you mentioned it, the production that he's getting, touchdown dependent production on an offense that isn't really that good with Josh Dobbs at quarterback. You can't rely on that. And James Conner, like you mentioned, he's looked good enough these past 2 weeks to make it that people aren't going to look at him and be like, well, he has no value at all because he's on a bad offense. He's had solid production every week. He looks like a reliable RB2. I think that upgrading from him definitely makes sense in this scenario. Now, we talk about James Conner. He's on a bad offense. I'm going to go to another player on a bad offense who we should be selling, who is super inflated right now, his value. And that's Adam Thielen. Again, now, you're probably wondering why the guy, me, that was in on Adam Thielen has him on the sell list 2 weeks in a row. But Zach, he was a sell last week and he just put up 30 points with Andy Dalton at quarterback. That's exactly the problem right there. Bryce Young has started 2 games. Adam Thielen is averaging 10 points a game with him under center. He's also got just an 18% target share and a 16% air yard share in those 2 games. And those are flex numbers at best. We need to consider those numbers in the context of an offense that scored 2 touchdowns with Bryce Young under center. And one of them was that last-minute garbage time score to Thielen last week that I said, don't buy into that because his offense is not that good, and it comes in garbage time when defenses really don't care if they allow points because there's 2 minutes left on the clock. If Andy Dalton were starting the rest of the way, I'd be tempted to take him off the sell list, but the Panthers aren't going to turn their backs on the first overall pick in the draft in 2 games because of an ankle injury. There's no scenario where Bryce Young is benched this season because Carolina went into this season with the understanding that he's going to be the guy long term. And if he has to play it out to get accustomed to the NFL climate, that's what they're going to do. Andy Dalton might finish a game here or there if the offense is really bad, but it's going to be Young at quarterback for the majority of the time. And that means the Panthers offense is going to be pretty ugly until they can get it figured out. And that might not be till late in the season or even once the fantasy playoffs are around. And by then you're getting torched by Adam Thielen putting up 5s and 6 bombs in your roster because Bryce Young's at quarterback and the Panthers offense bottoms out. He's at peak value right now. Adam Thielen is. You can flip him for a much more reliable wide receiver too, or even a running back like you mentioned if you need one. I think his value is good enough right now that he's not just like an add-in. He could be the main course in a trade, depending on who you're going after.
Yeah, no, I agree. I mean, he is like, some people might look at Adam Thielen. They might have had Adam Thielen on their fantasy roster in the past. They have some, some memories from like when Adam Thielen helped them out a couple of years ago, and they might view him as this wide receiver who's going to be getting it done all year, right? So maybe you throw in. I keep on going back to Jacoby Myers, but like trade Adam Thielen plus something for Jacoby Myers, because you're kind of almost replacing the perceived value in that wide receiver, but then you're also giving a little bit more on top of that, a little cherry on top, whoever that is. Maybe it's I'm going to keep using Isaiah Pacheco as that cherry on top because he scored a touchdown last week.
Right, yeah.
Maybe you guys haven't guessed that I do want to sell him, but those are the guys that we're going to go into details about, guys, in the buys and sells. I'm just going to list off a few guys that I have here on my list that I was considering talking about in detail, and that you can kind of understand, like, like Faraz is looking to buy, Faraz is looking to sell these guys as well. So when we talked about Kenneth Walker losing snaps and rushing share to Zach Charbonnet, something similar is happening to Ramondre Stevenson, this past week, right? Now, they were going up against the Jets. This was a tough offense. Zeke, helped out there. But just remember the trajectory of Zeke, where he's at in his career right now, and where Zach Charbonnet is in his career, okay? So, like, Zach Charbonnet, snaps could increase moving forward because he's this rookie that they just drafted early, and he's very good, opposed to Zeke, who's at the end of his career, with Ramondre, who's a very good running back, okay? So, this isn't necessarily the same thing. However, in week 3, we did see a similar cut in production and cut in terms of opportunity. Okay, so just keep that in mind. With that said, I'm not looking to sell Ramondre. I'm looking to buy him. Okay, because I don't think this is something that's going to be sustainable. The reason why I might have thought that the Seahawks situation is sustainable or gets worse for Kenneth Walker is because of this young up and coming running back moving into that backfield. I hope that makes sense.
Right. I think that makes sense. But with Ramondre Stevenson, he was also on my list of like guys that I'm thinking about maybe buying right
Yeah.
now because you mentioned it. Like it looks like suddenly Zeke is relevant. That's what it looks like on the surface level here. But you also have to consider the context of the game, like you mentioned. I mean, it wasn't a high scoring game at all. What do the Patriots have to be worried about if they're up by a touchdown even against the Jets? The Jets couldn't do anything on offense, so they were just going to run the clock out and just play exactly how they want to play
Yeah.
the game. That's just offense, ground game. Ezekiel Elliott got more touches because of that, and the weather wasn't very good. So I'm looking at this as Ezekiel Elliott getting a lot of touches just because, you don't want to burn Ramondre Stevenson out in a game where nobody's scoring. So I'm not worried about Ramondre Stevenson. I think that he's a potential buy. His route participation went up, last week, even though they didn't throw the ball a whole lot. So I'm not worried about Ramondre Stevenson right now. He's been underperforming, I think, this whole season compared to what we were expecting, which is good because people probably drafted him relatively high, expecting him to be their fantasy RB1 because that's what he was last season.
Yep. Exactly. And I think he is a good buy. These guys have had one carry inside the 5-yard line, and that has gone to Ramondre. Okay, Zeke hasn't had any carries inside the 5-yard line just yet. Okay, and I think it's going to remain Ramondre's show there.
Yeah.
All right, let's see. Who else did I have on this list? I had Jahmyr Gibbs as a buy. He is underperforming. Somebody that I think that is going to be, have his workload increase even with David Montgomery back over the next few weeks, okay? Bijan Robinson is somebody who underperformed last week. I would definitely throw offers out there. He has the utilization of an RB1. So try to get him. He could be a league winner. And at the end of the day, week 10, week 11, we'd probably be ranking him as a top 3 running back potentially, right? Breece Hall, you mentioned.
Right.
Christian Watson, we mentioned. Jonathan Taylor, we mentioned. Chris Olave is somebody who is getting ridiculous usage, is averaging 100 yards per game over the last 3 games, and he hasn't scored a touchdown yet, okay? So grab him before he does. He is due. He is probably going to score a touchdown in this game. Jameis Winston is going to be the quarterback, which means he's going to get 5,000 air yards in this game, and he's going to be airing it out. Okay, so just keep that in mind. Over the next couple weeks, Chris Olave could blow the fuck up. All right, Alexander Mattison is a surprise buy for me this week because you know why? He had a good game. People are thinking like, oh, we should sell him now. But hey, guys, listen, like he had one of the best, workloads in the entire NFL. He has one of the best jobs in the entire NFL right now on the Vikings. Okay, this was a good matchup for him. However, with the impending doom coming for him in terms of like Cam Akers coming in potentially, like I am buying Alexander Mattison as a hedge to think that that's not going to happen. Okay, that Cam Akers, everyone's assuming that Cam Akers is going to really work into this a ton. I think the coaches really like this guy. And I think that if they really wanted to get Mattison off the field, I think they would have done a little bit of that in week 3. And they didn't do any of that in week 3. Okay, I understand Akers wasn't active, but we'll see. I think they're going to give Akers some opportunity. And I think that share can come down a little bit. But Mattison didn't do anything to lose his job in week 3. And he played well. And in terms of expected fantasy points per game, a third most last week. Okay, among all running backs. Yeah. And he's getting used in the passing game as well. So I think there's a chance that Mattison remains their workhorse, their bell cow for the entire season. And because of the worry around Mattison, his perceived value has decreased a ton since the Akers trade, and since he has underperformed over those first 2 weeks.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think there are definitely some people out there that are like, well, enjoy it while you can, while Cam Akers isn't starting. And they're looking at Cam Akers coming in as like this doomsday operation. But like you mentioned, I think that his demise, Alexander Madison's potential demise, is like greatly exaggerated right now. Because if Cam Akers can't beat out Kyren Williams, and I don't want to take away from Kyren Williams, no slight to him.
Yeah.
He's looking good over in LA. But if he can't beat out Kyren Williams and he's a game day inactive, he's not even that good. I don't think that he's going to come in and just start taking away half the workload from Alexander Mattison. Like if Mattison stays up there, if he's still getting the majority of the carries and Cam Akers is just like mixing in, Madison's going to be just fine because he hasn't been incredibly efficient, but he doesn't have to be when the volume is going to be there. And I think that's going to be the case. I'm not worried about Alexander Mattison. I think you could buy him right now. And the value might be a little bit higher because he had a solid-ish game, this past week, but that's not going to be. It's not going to put him out of range
He's
in terms of
probably
what
the
it's going to take to
cheapest
get him.
running back that could have a game like that and then still be cheap. You know what I'm saying? And
Right.
That's why I'm concerned.
Yep.
Remember, Cam Akers, 1.3 yards per carry in week 1. Okay, just keep that in mind.
Disgusting. Yeah,
okay.
disgusting.
Kyren Williams, you mentioned him. Like, he had an off game, but he played on every single snap for the Rams. Okay, on Monday night. Buy that.
Yep.
Buy that all day long, if you can. Okay, I'm buying him like he's gonna be the guy all year long. Okay, so I'm buying him with the intention, with the assumption that that's gonna happen, and you don't have to give up those type of assets. We'll realize that in week 8 and week 9 potentially that he's the guy. Right now, there's still a little bit of ambiguity there because we saw the Darrell Henderson show, we saw the Cam Akers show. Will this turn into one of those? That story is painting a narrative that still allows Kyren Williams to be bought at this point. Okay. You mentioned Michael Pittman earlier. I think Michael Pittman is also somebody that you could buy who I think hasn't reached his potential yet because we only saw one, like a game and a half, with not even a game and a half, just like a game and a third with Anthony Richardson. So I think he's still somebody who I'm buying because I loved what I saw in week 1, with that 89%. I'm going to keep going back to it, man. 89%, catchable target rate from Anthony Richardson to Michael Pittman. I love that. I love that a lot because he's a really good wide receiver, and it looks like this quarterback wide receiver duo, it's going to be working. Okay. Zach, real quick to close it out. Calvin Ridley, man. Are we buying Calvin Ridley here? What are we doing here?
Yes.
Yeah, right.
We're buying Calvin Ridley, and he was one of the guys that I was considering putting on my list here. I was considering it, but I wasn't going to go full on because it is a little weird what the Jaguars are doing on offense right now. They're just not playing well.
Yeah.
And they have all these weapons. The offense is way better than it was last season because Calvin Ridley's there. But Trevor Lawrence is looking like early 2022 Trevor Lawrence, which isn't good. We expect them to take that first step, but I'm going to give them the benefit of the doubt here because they have so much talent. They have Trevor Lawrence. They have Tank Bigsby and Travis Etienne in the backfield. And they also have Evan Ingram at tight end, 2 or 3 very good wide receivers between Ridley, Zay Jones, Christian Kirk. There's too much talent here with Doug Peterson at head coach for me to say we need to get out of this offense. No, Calvin Ridley's been underproducing, but so has the entire Jaguars offense, and it goes back to that same old argument I make. It's one thing if the offense continues to play well and the receiver does not. But this is the entire offense that's like in a funk. They just got trounced by the Texans. CJ Stroud's look good, so good for them. But with Calvin Ridley, he's still getting the targets. He's just dropped a couple touchdowns, not to mention last week and this week. The one hit him right in the hands. He was interfered with, of course. So that's always annoying. I'm not worried about Calvin Ridley right now. I just think that he's had 2 tough games after opening with a really nice game. I think that can continue what we saw in the first week the rest of the season. The Jaguars have been in a funk. I think they're going to get out of it.
All right, I love it. I think I'm on board with you there. A couple guys that I'm selling on top of the guys that I mentioned already. Raheem Mostert, I think, is an obvious sell. Just be careful here because, don't sell him for just pennies. And I kind of feel like, I'm going to, reach out to the Mostert crowd, whoever has Mostert in my leagues, just to see, how cheap is he? You know what I'm saying? Because,
right.
If he's too cheap, I might be buying at this point, right? Because, everybody and their mother is saying to sell Raheem Mostert after this game. Also, Jeff Wilson coming back, and then, you have Devon Achane doing his thing. But, I think Mostert's still going to be involved to a point where, he could be still relevant. So, don't sell him for pennies. If you have to sell him for pennies, just don't sell him. Okay, I will say that. Zach Moss is the other obvious one. That one I'm willing to sell pretty easily, with JT coming back in week 5. So if you can get anything for Zach Moss, I would do that. And then Tutu Atwell is the other one. Similar situation with Cooper Kupp potentially coming back. We haven't seen anything with Cooper Kupp in terms of is he running routes? What's going on? Can I get an update? Is he doing okay? How's his family? Is his kids okay? I haven't heard anything about Cooper Kupp at all lately. So I would hope I would have heard something oh, he's running routes. He's looking good. But we haven't heard anything. So it's a little bit concerning there. Hopefully we get a video soon. Right. But Tutu Atwell will likely not be super fantasy relevant. He might have his games, but it's most likely going to be Cooper Kupp and Puka Nacua doing their thing when Kupp is back.
Yeah. I think that's a good call on Tutu Atwell. All these guys, like you mentioned Raheem Mostert. I think he's got a couple more games in him. Raheem Mostert does.
Yeah,
Zach Moss, I think Zach Moss is more. He's a very good sell candidate. Obviously, you want to move off him. I think people are going to be in tune to the fact that Jonathan Taylor is coming back. But Zach Moss is like your litmus test to see what you're getting with the Colts running back when
and you
they
have to
start.
sell
So
him
Zach
this week.
Moss,
You have to sell him this week because like you can't sell him after this week. Like
no,
you have to trade him to somebody who needs a running back this week to get them a win, right? So like that's really what it
yep.
comes down to.
Yeah, and you should do that at all costs. Unless you yourself need a running back.
Right. That's a different story.
Just for this week, he's not going to be a he's not going to be a long-term asset. Zach Moss, he has the workload, but what I'm saying is he's the litmus test for what you're going to get with the Colts running back when he does come in. So we said Zach Moss coming in was better than any other running back that he was replacing. Deion Jackson and what's his name? Evan Hull went on IR. Neither of them looked that good. Now Jonathan Taylor, we know he's a step up over Zach Moss, and we've seen the workload Zach Moss is getting. That's going to go to Jonathan Taylor. Could Zach Moss mix in every once in a while? Yeah. But Jonathan Taylor is going to be the guy. I think 25-plus touches every game is what you're looking for from Jonathan Taylor. If he's going to play with the Colts, you need to get off Zach Moss right now, like you mentioned. It is, urgent. You need to move him unless you're in a bad situation yourself. But he's not going to have much value outside of this next week.
Yeah, exactly. All right, let's talk about this Thursday Night Football matchup real quick, guys. We got the Lions and Packers. Like I mentioned earlier, David Montgomery, Christian Watson, Aaron Jones also might play in this game. It's looking likely for all these guys. Keep monitoring that, okay? Watson and Aaron Jones will be in my lineup if they play. David Montgomery, probably a back-end RB2 this week. I think Watson, I'll probably play him as a high-end wide receiver 3. Aaron Jones as a high-end running back 2. I think Jordan Love is a top 10 quarterback play this week. He's been getting it done. QB4 on the year. Hasn't had one bad fantasy day. Okay, so throw him in your lineup this week. Golf, also potential streamer in this matchup. Decent option, decent matchup this week. Fantasy Life's Game Hub is showing this one at 45.5 point total with the lines favored by 1.5. So Vegas is expecting a close game here. Jahmyr Gibbs, I think, top 18 running back play if Montgomery's back. Maybe like a top 15 play or top 12 play if Montgomery's out. He should be in lineups though. We talked about being patient with him already. I think Romeo Doubs is a solid flex play if Watson's out. I think Romeo Doubs is a solid flex. If Watson plays. Now, if he's out, I think Jaden Reed is a decent what-the-heck flex play. If Watson's in, it's a little bit tougher to play him, but, you never know. He could have his games. So I wouldn't necessarily drop him or anything like that because he is a good wide receiver. Luke Musgrave, top 10 tight end play for me this week. The Lions have given up the most fantasy points to tight ends this season. The rookie tight end on the other side of the ball, Sam Laporta, you mentioned him earlier, also one of the best tight end plays out there. As of right now, I'm viewing him as an every week starter. Okay, no tight end has had more receptions than Laporta through the first 3 games of their career. So there's that. Okay, put him in your lineups. Any other thoughts on this game, Zach, after my spiel?
I think you just about covered it. That's how I'm looking at it. I think Christian Watson's a really good play this week. I'm really optimistic for what he can do coming in this offense. Like I said, Jordan Love hasn't been dialed into any receiver really just yet. He's kind of been on Jaden Reed one week, and he's on Romeo Doubs another week. I think that Christian Watson can come in and be like his lean-on guy, the go-to guy in this offense, because we know the type of talent he was, the production that he was putting up last season. And Jordan Love, like I mentioned, looks better than I think any of us could have imagined. Have you seen some of the, all 22 angles of these passes he's putting out?
Nice, man.
I saw somebody tweeted out, and they said, they literally carbon copied Aaron Rodgers. But I don't think we're going that far. But some of the arm angles that he's putting in, they're really good. So Jordan Love has looked really good. I think
he's been sitting behind the guy, so he's going to have some of the tendencies for sure. He learned a couple things here and there over the last couple of years for sure.
Yeah. So Christian Watson, I think he can be the guy that he leans on, and we know Aaron Rodgers leaning on somebody. His name is Devontae Adams. If he's going to continue that trend of picking up on things that Aaron Rodgers used to do, I think Christian Watson has the best chance of doing that because he's the most talented receiver in this room right now.
All right, guys, that's going to do it for this episode. We'll be back tomorrow talking matchups going into week 4, along with any injury concerns we have to worry about. So see you then. Thanks a lot for listening. We really appreciate you guys. Thank you so much for tuning in and spending some time with us. So we'll be back tomorrow. We'll talk to you. See ya.